Nightfall in a medieval castle was not a simple change of light, it was a shift in power. As the last sliver of the sun sank behind the battlements, every stone, every corridor, every tower transformed into something older and more primitive than the people living inside it. The warmth of the day, frugal, inconsistent, already weak, evaporated in minutes. In its place surgia uma entidade invisível, o frio da pedra, uma força tão constante quanto o próprio reinado da fortaleza. Those who lived inside knew this moment. They felt it in their bones. The walls exhaled, the torches shrank, and the castle awakened. The inhabitants understood an unspoken truth. Daylight was merely a tregua. True life in the fortress began at night, when cold, vigilance, smoke, and silence collided to shape a world where survival wasn't symbolic. It was literal. Families gathered quickly, as if chased by the dark itself. Servants secured doors swollen by humidity. The steward walked through the halls inspecting every spark, every wick, every brazier, knowing that a single ember falling onto a dry rush mat could turn the entire stronghold into a pyre. Soldiers rushed up the stairs of the ramparts, tightening cloaks around their throats, ready to begin their lonely battle with the wind. Because while the outside world saw the castle as power, its own residents saw it as a challenge, one that began anew every dusk. Inside the great hall, the fire roared with the hunger of an animal. The first heat licked the faces of those who approached, but behind them the cold was already forming long fingers that tugged at their clothes, reminding them that warmth inside a fortress was never a given. It had to be conquered, defended, guarded like treasure. Stone was the enemy, wind was the accomplice, and night was the battlefield. The lord of the castle, wrapped in a mantle thick enough to stand on its own, observed his domain with quiet resignation. He knew that even his highest rank could not grant him exemption from the nightly war. His wife supervised the servants who stretched heavy tapestries to conceal cracks in the walls, trying to hold the frigid air at bay. Children played closer and closer to the fire, their shadows dancing along the stone floor, as they sought a warmth that never lasted longer than a few breaths. Smoke swirled overhead in uncertain spirals, not high enough to escape perfectly through the vent, not low enough to choke the room. It settled in a restless fog that burned eyes and clung to hair, impregnating everything with the scent of survival. Beyond the hall, in the twisting guts of the fortress, darkness reigned. Stairwells caught the draft like funnels. Storage rooms breathed cold air that curled up from the floor. Chambers without hearths became nothing more than stone coffins with doors. Even the chapel, the one place where fragile hope flickered, was a chamber of frost where breath turned prayer into mist. And yet, no place was as intimidating as the ramparts. Up there, the night watcher began his ritual. He adjusted the wool around his neck, tightened the leather straps over his chest, and pulled his hood so far forward it turned his face into a mere shadow. Wind struck him without mercy. His eyes watered instantly. His fingers stiffened around the torch shaft. The cold here was not cold in, it was a predator. He walked the wall anyway, because if he didn't, everyone below slept in danger. When the wind paused, just for a breath, he could hear everything, the wood of the gate shifting, the banners snapping, the distant bark of the Lord's hounds, the muffled laughter from the hall, the crackling of the great hearth, and beneath all this, the constant rumble of the castle, settling into the night like an immense beast curling around its prey. This was the beginning, the moment when every inhabitant accepted their fate for the next hours, endure or be worn down by the stone. Night would deepen, cold would grow teeth, and the people inside would learn once again why medieval castles were not places of rest, but arenas of daily survival. Night in a medieval castle did not stay still. It moved. It traveled through corridors, seeped under doors, crawled across floors, and coiled itself around ankles, wrists, and lungs. To those who lived inside, the cold felt alive, as if the very stones were conspiring to drain the warmth from every living creature foolish enough to seek shelter within them. This was not metaphor. It was daily reality. The fortress itself acted like an enormous sponge for winter. During daylight, even in summer, stone absorbed every gust of chill that brushed against it. When night fell, It released that stored frigidity in waves. The result was uncanny. A castle could feel colder inside than the blizzard outside its walls. The first to face this roaming cold were the servants. They knew the castle's secret pathways, the ones where the wind struck hardest. The corridor behind the kitchen, where a hidden draught licked ankles like a stray animal. The narrow stairwell in the eastern tower, where the cold plunged downward in a vertical current so powerful it could extinguish a candle in seconds. These were not stories. These were places of caution, whispered about among those who had to walk them in the dark with both hands balancing pitchers of ale or bundles of firewood. Some believed the cold had preferences, favoring corners, cracks, and dead-end passages where it could ambush an unsuspecting passerby. The result was an odd choreography inside the castle. People moved quickly, rarely lingering in any room without a fire. A servant delivering water to the Lord's chambers might cross 2 or 3 such freezing traps, each stealing a layer of heat from her body until her fingers stiffened and her breath came out in ragged bursts. Even the castle's animals felt it. The hounds slept nearer to the hearth than the people. The horses steamed in the stables like living furnaces. The chickens huddled together in trembling bundles of feathers. Every living creature knew the night belonged to the cold. But humans were stubborn. Humans tried to fight back. The Lord's family relied on strategic warmth, a knowledge passed down like sacred lore. Each chamber was adapted into a defensive position. Heavy wool tapestries hung from the ceiling to trap heat. Animal skins lined the floors. Beds were islands of survival. Thick feather mattresses, layered blankets, and curtains that could turn a sleeping space into a tent-like cocoon. Yet even in these fortified chambers, the cold found ways in. It crept through arrow slits, invaded floor cracks, and seeped around door frames swollen by humidity. It even descended from the ceiling where moisture gathered and then dripped onto blankets, pillows, or exposed skin. A single drop of ice-cold water hitting the neck at midnight was enough to wake anyone in terror, convinced, for a moment, that some unseen presence had touched them. This wasn't superstition. Not yet. That would come later. For now the inhabitants faced a physical enemy, the castle itself. Down in the great hall the fire still roared, but its protection was fragile, inconsistent, and painfully limited. Faces burned, backs froze, sparks flew unpredictably, forcing those closest to flinch or shift position. The smell of smoke clung to every garment, hair strand and tapestry. Above, the rafters groaned as cold contracted the beams, echoing like footsteps from another world. By midnight, the draft tunnels in the floors awakened. These invisible rivers of icy air flowed from the lower levels, the armory, the storage vaults, the dungeons, and crept up into living spaces. Even the hearths were not immune. Flames danced wildly when the cold surged upward, sometimes bending as if bowing to an invisible force. And this was only the surface of the night's hostility. Because soon the stone would begin to speak. The castle shifted, settled and sighed. And to those trying to sleep, these cracks and groans sounded alive, as though the fortress were whispering warnings or dragging its weight across the darkness. No wonder so many believed that spirits walked the halls. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Not every enemy in a medieval castle was human. Some were built into the very walls. When the night deepened, and the last ember in the great hall sighed into a dull red glow, the castle entered its most dangerous phase. It was the hour when sound ruled, when darkness thickened into something with weight, when even the bravest knights felt an involuntary shiver climb their spine, a shiver they always blamed on the cold, though everyone secretly knew it wasn't just the cold. Because in a medieval castle, silence was never silent. The walls never rested, the floors never slept, the stone never stayed still. As temperatures dropped, wood contracted and groaned. Iron hinges popped like knuckles. Moisture froze inside cracks, making them creak with slow, deliberate pulses. These were the normal sounds, the ones servants recognized and ignored. But there were other sounds, too, the ones no one could explain. Servants heard footsteps on staircases that should have been empty. A chambermaid swore she heard someone breathing behind a tapestry. A stable boy refused to go near the western tower after midnight because he'd heard chains dragging below the floor. None of these feelings came from ghosts. None came from superstition. They came from the architecture itself. The spiral staircases were built as acoustic chambers, amplifying even the softest noise. A mouse scrabbling in the pantry could echo like a child running in bare feet. A loose shutter slamming outside could travel through the arrow slits and bounce around the stone like a whispered conversation. Dripping water from the ceilings created rhythmic tapping that sounded tragically like someone pacing. The castle wasn't haunted. The castle was alive. It breathed wind, exhaled cold, and spoke in cracks, groans, and echoes. But humans, unprotected in the crushing dark, filled in the blanks with fear. In the noble chambers, the lord lay beneath the curtains of the bed dozzle, staring at the canopy. The cold seeped through the mattress despite the layers of wool, but it wasn't the cold that kept him awake. It was the sound of someone moving in the corridor. Soft steps, one after another, slow, measured, deliberate. He pushed aside the heavy blankets just enough to listen, body frozen, breath held. A thief? An assassin? A foreign spy? No, it was the wind. The corridor funneled the night air like a tunnel. When a gust hit the castle walls, it travelled through the seam under the main door, vibrated along the tapestries and mimicked footsteps. Every medieval castle had this phenomenon, and over centuries it birthed countless ghost stories. But the lord did not know this, nor did his wife. She slept with a stone wrapped in wool at her feet. Her body curled against the cold, but when the wind howled against the arrow slit near her chamber, she woke in terror, convinced it was someone crying in the courtyard. Down in the servants' quarters, the night shift guards huddled around the faint remains of the kitchen fire. They heard scratching behind the walls. The youngest among them whispered that something was trying to get in. The older guards knew the truth, rats searching for warmth, but they said nothing. In the pitch darkness of a medieval night, even grown men clung to their own superstitions like blankets. Across the courtyard, the stables erupted in sudden noise, snorts, hooves scraping, animals restless. The cold crept into their bones too, and the wooden beams above them contracted like the ribs of some great beast. Horses sensed it before humans did. They always did. And outside, on the ramparts, the lone night watchman fought a battle of his own. Not against intruders, not against armies, but against the cold whispering in his ear. He pulled his cloak tighter as another freezing gust stabbed through him. The torch flickered violently. The shadows leapt like living things across the stone. The watchman had to remind himself again and again that shadows were just shadows. Because in a medieval night, the cold made imagination deadly. A tired guard could mistake a banner for a man, a noise for a threat, a shadow for a sword. Fear killed as efficiently as steel, so the watchman forced himself to stay alert, to keep moving. Step after step, breath after breath, fighting not sleep, but numbness. Because once the cold numbed his mind, he'd stop hearing the real dangers. Some said the cold could kill even the strongest warrior. Some said fear finished the rest. Inside the castle, the wind prowled through the corridors. Outside, frost painted the stones like a thin white shroud. Every inhabitant, lord, servant, guard, waited for dawn as if it were salvation. And until the first grey light crept over the horizon, the castle remained a creature awake in the dark, whispering through its walls, a fortress that protected bodies, a prison that tormented minds. Perfect. I will begin. Chapter 4. In the same long, immersive, YouTube documentary style, fully in English, continuing the narrative without repeating previous elements, and maintaining the cold, atmospheric, medieval tone. For the watchman of a medieval castle, night did not simply arrive. It descended, heavy, absolute, and merciless, like a second winter layered atop the first. When the last torch was extinguished in the courtyard, and the final scullion stumbled to his straw bed, the castle handed its safety to a handful of exhausted men wrapped in wool, leather, and desperation. These men, the Night Watch, lived between two worlds, the world of vigilance and the world of hallucination, a realm where survival was never guaranteed, because in a medieval stronghold, night patrol was less a duty and more a slow execution, performed by frost. The ramparts, a gauntlet of wind and fear. High above the sleeping fortress, the ramparts caught the worst that winter could deliver. Every gust of wind sliced across the walkway like a blade honed on Arctic stone. The watchman's cloaks snapped behind them like wounded banners, threatening to be torn from their shoulders. The cold at that height was different, thinner, sharper, almost intelligent. The men breathed in clouds that froze on their beards, forming crystalline masks. Their eyelashes gathered frost until every blink felt like pulling a curtain made of needles. Fingers stiffened around the shaft of the spear. To let go risked dropping it into the courtyard. To hold it too long risked losing sensation entirely. But even physical pain wasn't the true enemy of the watchtower. It was stillness. The kind of stillness that tricked the brain into drifting, that lured a man into thinking he could rest for just a moment, lean against the parapet, close his eyes, breathe slowly. Those who did often never moved again. Knights spoke of wind spirits stealing breath, of demons hiding in the snowdrifts. But the truth was more brutal. Hypothermia. Could silence a man without warning. A watchman might slump quietly, his body freezing in place, discovered hours later by the next patrol. His eyes frosted open as if still staring into the void, and yet they walked, step after step, breath after breath, because to stop was to die. Inside the towers, suffocation and shadows. Inside the castle's towers, the night watch faced another danger, the suffocating, deceptive warmth of enclosed stone. It seemed safer than the ramparts, protected from wind and snow. But the walls were cold reservoirs of trapped winter, radiating frost like invisible poison. The air was stale, heavy with the smell of old smoke, oiled leather, and the faint metallic scent of moisture freezing on iron. In these cramped, spiraling corridors, darkness clung to the stone like a living thing. Lanterns smoked and flickered, unable to push light further than an arm's reach. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, bending and twisting with each gust of breath. More than one guard claimed he saw figures standing at the ends of hallways, motionless silhouettes that dissolved the moment a torch approached. Not spirits, not invaders, not assassins, just tricks of the flame, born from exhaustion and ice. Yet in the dead of night, reason froze faster than water. A frightened man could become a dangerous man. The listening post, where sound became a weapon. In a castle, darkness was terrifying, but sound was the true tormentor. On the lowest level of the donjon, the listening post was a stone chamber designed to pick up vibrations through the walls. It was a medieval alarm system, crude but effective. The guards stationed there endured an orchestra of horrors, scratching that might be rats, thuds that might be falling ice, distant rumbles that might be shifting stone, and the long, low groan of wood contracting in the cold. Every noise carried through the castle like a cry for help. But the worst was the silence, because when the castle fell completely silent, the guard's heartbeat became the loudest thing in the chamber. The human mind, deprived of input, invented its own stimuli. Some guards reported hearing footsteps behind them. Others swore they heard whispers through the walls. One young man fled his post midwinter, babbling about someone calling his name from inside the stone. He wasn't lying. He wasn't mad. He was cold, dangerously cold. And a freezing brain sees ghosts in everything. The courtyard patrol. Between fire and ice, 2 guards were always assigned to patrol the courtyard, the coldest part of the entire fortress. Here, the wind descended without mercy through the open sky. Snow accumulated in the corners like white ash. The fire pit in the center was kept burning, but only barely, starved for oxygen, flickering like an exhausted heart. The guards circled it constantly, holding out their hands, turning their bodies, trying to catch whatever heat the flames grudgingly offered. But it was a gamble. Too close, and their cloaks might catch fire. Too far, and frostbite would creep into their fingers. They walked, they shivered, they muttered prayers. The courtyard was the place where men's thoughts drifted toward home, toward mothers, wives, children, fields, and mornings without frost. Many watchmen said, the courtyard was where hope froze first. the weight of responsibility. Every one of these men carried the same invisible burden. If they failed, the entire castle would die. A missed sound, a moment of sleep, a torch allowed to go out, a gate not checked, a shadow mistaken for nothing. One mistake could mean intruders scaling the walls, assassins reaching the Lord's chamber, or fire devouring the keep from within. So they remained awake, trembling violently, clutching spears, repeating their patrols like ritual chant. They weren't warriors. They weren't heroes. They were human shields against the night. And each sunrise felt less like a natural cycle and more like a victory stolen from death. The final hour before dawn was known among medieval watchmen as the Wolf's Hour, a stretch of time so cold, so silent, and so treacherous that even the bravest knights avoided traveling during it. In this liminal space between night and day, the castle seemed to hold its breath. The slow death of the night, no matter how many winters a man had endured, the Wolf's Hour always felt the same, endless. The air thickened, as if time itself had frozen. Torches burned lower, their flames smothered by the weight of frost. Every stone, every gate hinge, every wooden beam groaned in agony, tightening under the pressure of night. To the guards, this hour felt like a reckoning. It was the moment when exhaustion struck deepest, when minds faltered, when fingers stopped responding, and when the thought of closing one's eyes for just a heartbeat became dangerously seductive. The changing of shifts. Inside the keep, the new watch began to stir, stiffly, reluctantly. Wrapping themselves in furs still damp with melted frost, they prepared for the ritual of relieving the night guards. This moment was more than a shift change. It was a silent ceremony. Each man who had survived the night passed on crucial warnings. A shutter that would not stay closed. A section of rampart where the wind cut deep enough to numb the legs. A torch that burned too dim, too fast. A strange sound heard beyond the walls. These exchanges were not casual. They were confessions whispered from men who had seen shadows move and frost bloom on their own skin. A castle on the edge of awakening. As the first hints of blue crept across the horizon, the fortress began to change. Crows stirred on the highest rooftops, shaking snow from their wings. The hearths deep in the kitchens were stoked back to life. The blacksmith prepared his coals for the day's work. Servants emerged from their quarters like ghosts thawing into existence. But the watchmen, the ones who had endured the Wolf's Hour, were the first to witness it. The transformation from a frozen tomb to a living fortress. The tension broke, slowly, reluctantly. The relief of light. When the first beam of sunlight finally struck the highest tower, it felt less like a sunrise and more like salvation. The ramparts glowed faintly as frost retreated. The courtyard thawed by a degree. The air loosened. Some guards cried quietly, their tears freezing before they reached their chins. Others simply stared at the horizon, unmoving, as if daring the sun to vanish again. For a brief moment, just a heartbeat, the castle felt warm. The ceremony of thanks. In many medieval strongholds, the moment after sunrise was marked by a humble ritual, a prayer, a shared breath, a silent acknowledgement that the night had not claimed them. The watchmen gathered in the courtyard, hands shaking, faces pale, boots crusted with ice. No words were spoken, none were needed. They had survived. A victory that meant everything, and nothing for the castle. The new day meant chores, plans, politics, and life continuing as expected. But for the night watch, dawn was not a beginning. It was an ending. A small, quiet victory in a war fought every evening. Because when the sun set again, and it always did, the cycle would begin anew. The frost, the shadows, the madness, the fear. Medieval fortresses did not fall only to armies. Sometimes they fell to winter. And the men who stood between both, the watchmen, carried the weight of every silent victory.